a lot of respect. Okay, here we go. I am gonna move my screen here a little bit. I can't see it now, but I'm gonna unshare my screen real fast. Okay, excellent. Thank you again so much for being here this evening. Thank you so much to Holly Van Weeren for joining us. I'm going to just read you her quick bio, and then she's got some excellent content to share with us tonight. Holly Van Weeren has been teaching for over 40 years. She's assisted with 5 charter school startups in the area and is the co-founder of New Summit Charter Academy. Her teaching experience includes homeschooling, charter schools, private schools, and mainstream public schools. In addition to instructing her own 5 children, Holly has taught gifted children, struggling students, and everyone in between. She's enjoyed teaching preschool, elementary, high school, and college students. Holly is currently the director of Literacy Intervention, Inc., a program that supports dyslexic students. Since the beginning of her career, Holly has been interested in helping students who struggle with reading. After receiving a master's in curriculum and instruction, she was later trained as a reading specialist and is now a certified academic language therapist. She loves to see reading progress in the students she supports and to come alongside the families of those students. In addition, Holly loves to assist teachers in reading instruction. She's been providing individual and group reading therapy for over 10 years. For her, each student is a unique person with individual strengths and challenges. It is up to the teachers, Holly believes, to figure out how that student learns best and to deliver the appropriate instruction. One of Holly's primary educational beliefs is that parents have both the ultimate right and responsibility for the training of their children. Schools exist, therefore, to support parents in this honorable and significant task. Her belief that parents are the primary educators of the children makes her a natural advocate for dyslexic students. On a personal note, Holly has been married to Rick, a Colorado Springs realtor, for over 40 years. They have 5 grown children and 10 grandchildren. Holly, Rick, and their family moved here from Northern California about 30 years ago. They continue to enjoy the people of the area. Above all else, Holly's family is her greatest joy. Holly enjoys spending her free time reading, knitting, and gardening. Most often, she is seeking opportunities to be with her family. Holly, thank you so much for being here tonight. I'm going to hand it off to you now.
Okay, you're very welcome. Good evening, everybody. I'm happy to see everybody here, and I'm thinking that you may be here for varying reasons. Maybe some of you are worried about a child of your own. Maybe some of you have you're not old enough to be grandparents like me, but maybe a family member, a nephew or niece that may be concerned about their reading, or you just thought the topic looked kind of interesting and had nothing else to do tonight and decided to do this instead of watching Monday Night Football. So welcome for whatever reason you're here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you, and let's get that going. Let me see here if I can. Okay, so I had this all ready to go, of course. As I'm figuring this out, I'm not seeing my, oh, there it is. Last one. So I have been at this a little bit, and it's really been my joy and pleasure to be able to help families and the children really who struggle with reading. And so this is really about if you suspect that your child or somebody you know student is behind. I'm going to use the word behind and maybe a struggling reader. So to start with, if you have questions along the way, if you could you can put those in the chat box. I think Jessica and Erin are going to help kind of field those questions. And at the end of the presentation, the PowerPoint, we'll go through those. If there's something you absolutely feel like has to be said mid PowerPoint, you are welcome to do that. Okay. All right. So let's get started. So first of all, can everybody see this? Are we good, Jessica and Erin? Yeah, okay. So first of all, I want to talk about
That looks
how we
good.
were made. How are we wired? How is our brain wired? And we are very much, let me do this one. I'm going to change this just a little bit so it's a little easier to see for everybody. There we go. So the way we are wired to speak. We have been speaking as humans for a long time, but I don't know if you can see this, but learning to read, the act of reading is a relatively new thing in the history of humans. And so we're not wired to read. We have to be taught to read, but we're not wired that way. The conclusion of that is that reading is unnatural. Speaking is natural. Reading is not. We have to formally be taught. And that makes it tricky for a lot of us. So I wanted to talk about early signs of being behind in reading. And I'm thinking that these are preschool and older, preschool, maybe kindergarten. And so some of the things are a delay in talking or using sentences. And I want to be clear that just because a child is delayed in talking doesn't automatically mean that that child has dyslexia or is going to be a struggling reader, excuse me. But it is something that we look at. And as you look at this list, remember there is no one specific trait for struggling readers or dyslexic students. Rather, it's kind of a conglomerate of different things. But some children really have difficulty of remembering the letters of the alphabet, no matter how many times mom or dad has tried to teach them the alphabet. It doesn't stick. They just seem to have it one day, and the next hour or the next day, it's like they've never seen it before. Same with colors. Days of the week are just really difficult for some children. Um, some children who struggle later with reading really have a hard time recognizing and naming rhyming words. I know when I was little, a long time ago, my mom and dad always played rhyming games with us. And this is a normal precursor to reading, is being able to recognize those sounds that sound alike, the end of the words, rhyming words. A child might have a hard time remembering the names of things. And it's funny, when somebody first told me this, I kind of laughed at it. But then after I started working with these kiddos, I realized, oh my goodness, it's true. There are some kids who say whatchamacallit or call everything a thingy because they can't remember the name of it. And most recently, I had a really interesting student, a fourth grade girl, and her parents were telling me when she was younger, until about second grade, she could not remember the names of breakfast, lunch, and dinner. She could not. They worked with her. So she had her own system. She called them first breakfast, second breakfast, and third breakfast. So that's a problem in terms of a sign towards something that may be off and may affect her reading later. They struggle to sequence things. They have a hard time if they were given let's say, a story in pictures, and they would have a hard time determining what happened first, what happened next, a sequence. And by the way, our alphabet is in sequence. It's not random. I always tell my students it's not A, M, L, K, Y. It's in sequences in the same sequence. So it's pretty important that students know how to sequence things. Often we see in children who later struggle with reading difficulty in following multi-step directions. And maybe some of you parents can relate to this. You ask your child to go upstairs, brush their teeth, get on pajamas, and go to bed. And then you walk up there 15 minutes later and they look at you like, what? Didn't you hear what I said? They heard, but it's really hard for them to, number one, retain all that in their memory, and number two, to follow through. And then some children really struggle with the individual sounds in words. And I personally think all people do this at some point, sometimes, but you will hear children say spaghetti here we go, spaghetti, or if I can even say this one. This is supposed to be heckalopter instead of helicopter. They'll get their syllables mixed up. Some kids are, whoops, some kids mix up. I'm going to just see if I can do this. Okay, there's a little screening thing right there. The mix up words, and I used a couple of examples here, couple of words. So I read about a story which I thought was so pertinent to all this. There was a class of fourth graders, I think, or fifth graders reading about World War I, and they were reading about, the sentence said something about Poland being invaded by Germany. And the child who struggled with reading, she read it, Poland was invaded by Germany. And so she got very mixed up. Obviously, if you mix up your words, it's going to make a huge difference in what you're reading, in the meaning and your comprehension. And that is something we often see with kids. They don't even realize that they're not reading it correctly. To them, it's like, what's the problem, right? So also they have a difficult time with time, a difficulty with the concept of time. It's hard for them to distinguish what happened yesterday from a year ago, from last week, or in the future. Many times these children really struggle with, they're looking forward to something happening, let's say Christmas, and they don't have a good sense of how far away 3 months is. For them, they keep asking every day, is it almost there? Is it next week? They really struggle with those kind of things. And finally, many of our students who struggle in reading have a family history of reading struggles. So this is not just their nuclear family. This could be a great uncle, a cousin, um, a sister, could be parents. And we so often, when I talk to some kids who struggle, the mom will say, yeah, that's just like my husband. He had similar things going on. So, and the statistics and the research say if one parent is dyslexic or is on that profile where they struggle with reading, there is a 50% chance that at least one of their children will also struggle. And I want to tell you that reading struggles and dyslexia happen on a continuum. Some children are very slightly affected, while others are quite severely impacted. And so it's a little tricky to identify that, because it's the other thing is, all the children that we are talking about, they're as different as fingerprints, and which makes it kind of fun for me, getting to know them, because they're all so unique and different. But they're almost always, with the kids that I've worked with, have had somebody in the family who's also can relate to this kind of struggle with reading. So about letter reversals, I wanted to mention this because this is a common misconception about students who struggle with reading. Let me tell you that if your child is in preschool, kindergarten, even first grade, and they're reversing B's and D's or P's and Q's, that is normal. That is developmentally normal. But if they get up to second, third, fourth grade and they're still reversing those, then that's something we want to, that could be something we want to look into. And that could be a red light that there might be something going on. So just because a child reverses letters, either, and sometimes reading words like back to front even, that does not automatically mean they're going to have reading struggles, nor do they have dyslexia. It could be they do, but it doesn't automatically mean that. Okay, so there are many causes for students being behind in reading. One was maybe your child was in kindergarten or first grade during the COVID years. That's going to be a problem, right? They might have missed out. They might have their school was closed down for a time, or they did all their learning online. And some children can do that, and other children really struggled with that. I tried to do reading intervention during COVID online, and I would best describe it as herding cats. I would not say it was the most productive thing I've ever tried. There is a made up term called dysteachia. I love the term. Somebody made it up and I borrowed it. your child might have been in a school where the teacher was not trained on how to teach structured reading. And I, I love all teachers, but some teachers may not be the best teachers, and they might have had one of those and not known how to, for instance, differentiate for the child who is struggling in reading. And finally, there is a family problem with having to move a lot. And I know in a military town like ours, the parents have to move, the families have to move, and that can break up a school year and interrupt a child's learning. So that could be a concern, and that could be the cause of a child being behind in school, particularly in reading. Also, unfortunately, any family trauma can add to that. We always say in education that an emotional trauma hijacks the brain. It paralyzes the brain. You can imagine a child who's had something um, really traumatic, disconcerting happen at home before he comes to school, has a very hard time concentrating on anything, much less learning all the different parts of learning to read. And then tonight we're going to cover dyslexia. And most of the children who have a diagnosed learning disability, an IEP, we'll talk about that later, in schools, most of those kids, if there's one in language, it's dyslexia. Okay, 1 out of 5 students, 1 out of 5 people in any group, think of your different groups, might be a church group of friends, group of kids, group at school, approximately 1 out of 5 are on that dyslexia continuum. And that's what we want to talk about tonight. Okay. This is Dr. Sally Shaywitz. She's I call her the guru of dyslexia. She's written a fantastic book that every concerned parent or parent of a dyslexic type student should read. She's out of Yale, and she's done a phenomenal job of getting the research and also advocating for these students and getting the information out to the parents. That's so important. He defines dyslexia as a learning disability that's characterized by an unexpected difficulty with reading and is language based. And I want to just pick on a few of those words. Unexpected. So you may have a child and he or she probably is so bright, and yet they just can't seem to learn their alphabet. They just can't seem to decode words. And it's confusing. I hear all the time from the parents of my students, but he or she is so smart. And I say, you're right. They are. They're so smart. So it's not about the IQ. It's not about not being smart. It's a phonological problem. Phonological means sound associated with written letters. So knowing that A makes a lot of sounds, knowing that ER says knowing that IGH says I. And Dr. Shaywitz says it's a phonological weakness in a sea of strengths. And I love that visual. So picture the sea, and everything is very strong. The child is good at so many things, and yet they just have this thing in the middle, this phonological thing where they can't read or spell. So here's a couple of statistics I don't enjoy sharing because they're disheartening, but there is hope. Reading proficiency by 3rd grade is the most important predictor of high school graduation and career success. 3rd grade predicts high school graduation. Wow. Yet the National Campaign for Grade Level Reading reports 67% of children, not just here, nationwide, and more than 80% of those from low-income families are not proficient readers by the end of 3rd grade. So if we take that statistic and apply it to those 3rd grade, wow, that's a whole bunch of kids who are at risk for not even graduating high school. According to the National Adult Literacy Survey, 70% of all incarcerated adults can't read at 4th grade, meaning they lack the reading skills to navigate many everyday tasks or hold down anything but lower paying jobs. So we've got an epidemic in this country, and It's really fortunate that we have a lot of research and a lot of good tools now. Let's talk a little bit about the dyslexic myths, because there are a lot of them going around. And these are just common things. One is that you can outgrow it. I actually met a teacher who told me she used to be dyslexic, but she grew out of it. You can't grow out of dyslexia. It's just something you have. You can close the gap. You can learn to compensate, but you don't ever just lose it. It's not something that you get over. Reversing letters and numbers is the main characteristic of dyslexia. We know that's not true. It is a characteristic, but it's, as I said earlier, it's very common in younger students. A lot of people think that dyslexia is a problem of vision. I hear a lot of people say that their teacher or their doctor suggested tracking or some kind of vision therapy. If your child needs vision therapy, please get it for them. But that's not dyslexia. That's something different. That's a vision problem. There are advocates of these colored glasses and colored screens that children can lay over words. And I've had parents say that they swear by those. They say that makes all the difference in the world. And I say, use them if that helps your child. That's not typical dyslexia, probably. That's another issue. But if you find something that works for your child, please don't withhold it from it. That would be horrible to find something that works and not use it for your own child. Another myth is that dyslexic students tend to be lazy or they don't try hard enough. And when I first got into this whole world, I was a little I laughed at that one. I thought, oh, come on. But boy, I am surprised at the number of teachers. And honestly, I've heard even parents say, my child just doesn't take it seriously. They're not trying hard enough. They're not concentrating. Well, here's the truth. Kids who struggle, with reading, they are trying about at least 10 times harder than the kids for whom reading is easy. With our kids that I work with, I work with a few that are after school. They are exhausted because it's so hard for them. They have put in such efforts. They're not lazy at all. It's not that they have a lack of focus or that they're not concentrating. They are concentrating. They're doing the best they can, and it's just a different thing. Dyslexic students' brains are wired differently, not worse, but differently. We are all wonderfully made. I really believe that. But some have brains that are just different. And so to say to a child who thinks differently, you're not trying hard enough, that's so defeating. That it doesn't do anybody any good. Another myth is the student cannot be identified as having reading struggles until they get to an older grade. That's not true. For years in education, we followed a model of waiting to fail, and that is we would not help children in a really significant way until they were 2 years behind, and usually that was third and fourth grade. Fortunately, that's been broken, and we don't believe that, and we know that it's not true. We can help kids and even identify kids as dyslexic or on that profile much earlier than that. And why should a child struggle waiting to fail in order to get hope? That just seems so wrong, and we've come out of that now. A student who struggles with reading should not be tested in fourth grade. Again, we know now even preschoolers and kindergartners can be tested to see if they're on that dyslexic profile. Dyslexia happens only in English. Nope, as weird language as we have, and we do have a very complicated language, I will admit. If you're dyslexic, you can be dyslexic in Japanese or Spanish or whatever language. Dyslexia happens when parents do not read enough to their children. If any of you parents, moms, dads, caretakers are thinking at all in that direction, please let me take that from you. It has nothing to do with you not reading enough to your child. It is a brain thing. Current dyslexia intervention, is targeting support for students before the kids even get into kindergarten, which is super cool. But here's what happens. Research shows that you can help a child who struggles with reading. The earlier you can do it, the more you can and close the gap. And let me say, close the gap. Dyslexic students don't usually catch up all the way to their peers. But what we do is we close the gap. And so this is what the gap looks like in preschool or kindergartner. So there's just a small gap here. And then as the child gets into elementary school through those years, well, guess what? The gap gets bigger. And then by the time they're middle school, high school, and adulthood, we have a huge gap. The time to intervene is now. I spent a lot of my years trying teaching kindergarten and first grade, and I mistakenly told parents wrong. I told a lot of kindergarten parents, your child's going to catch up second semester, and they didn't. And I was wrong because I didn't know. And the fact is, if there's a problem when they're early, it's probably going to be a bigger problem later, unless it's something that I from that list of things that I mentioned for reasons why children could be behind. So this little guy says, yes, help me. Okay. But then in elementary school, help me. But then later, it's never too late. Even when the gap is big or an adult, it's never too late. People can get help and we can help close that gap with the right intervention. So keep that in mind. I've had some parents say, oh my gosh, I didn't know when they were little, when they were in kindergarten or first grade, and now they're fifth grade. Well, don't lose hope. It's never too late. So back in 2000, President George W. Bush put together a reading panel, a bunch of experts from the country, and he asked them to figure out what makes a good reader, which I think was really very innovative for the time. So they came up with these 5 things. I'm going to briefly talk about these. So phonemic awareness is the ability to hear individual sounds and manipulate them, so including rhyming. So, for instance, the word cat has 3 sounds. What are they? At. What if I take the word cat and I drop the t and I put in n instead? That word is can. So that is a quality that good readers have that our dyslexic students, most of them, struggle with. And it doesn't mean that they can't learn it. It means that a lot of students learn that just naturally, and our dyslexic type students have to be taught. Makes sense. Phonics is when you add a written symbol to the sound, as I was referring to earlier. A actually makes 5 different sounds, and OUGH makes 4 different sounds. You have to know that. That's phonics, and that's how children learn to read unfamiliar words and multisyllabic or multisyllable words. They need that phonics. Fluency is the ability of a person to read with natural speed, but accuracy and automaticity. So they need to know those words correctly, obviously say the right word. So invade instead of invite, but also they need to understand what they're reading quickly enough that they understand what they've read. Okay. Vocabulary is an interesting one. So vocabulary before a child, oops, I'm doing this again. Before a child gets into school, vocabulary comes from the spoken language at home. So by 5 years old, the vocabulary is what the parents and the family has spoken. Okay, but after a child gets into school, research tells us comes from books. So a child who is good at reading and who loves to read, well, they'll pick up a lot of vocabulary from reading good books. A child who struggles with reading naturally doesn't want to read. And so their vocabulary is naturally affected in the negative. And again, vocabulary is something that can be taught. And then the fifth component is comprehension. That is, a person can read and understand. The whole goal of reading is really none of these things. None of these things really are the goal, but all of those lead to comprehension, understanding, and enjoying what you've read. As good a job as that panel did, there were some things that were missing, we know. They didn't talk about spelling. They didn't talk about writing as in creative writing or writing your thoughts. And they didn't really talk about handwriting. But that's okay. I mean, I think they did a fantastic job. Um, so let's talk about spelling a little bit. I have a lot of parents who tell me, my child can read, but they can't spell. And I heard this said once at a conference I went to. Reading and spelling are like two sides of a coin. So just because a child can read well doesn't mean they're going to spell well. The reason is some children have such an incredible memory. Every word that they've seen a few times, they are able to put it in their memory bank and they're able to retrieve it. But they don't have the phonics. They've never been taught, or maybe they never picked it up. And so when it comes to spelling, they need that phonics. Also, in reading, if a child doesn't have a phonics base, they will get to, again, these harder words. Every unfamiliar word that hasn't been put into their long-term memory, they're lost. Or it's a long, 3-syllable word. They're lost because they don't have that phonics. You have to have it for both. So spelling and reading are really intricately tied together. And that's why when I screen kids, we always do a reading test, but I do a spelling test um, in addition. Okay. So let's talk about some of the negative affects. In other words, emotional kinds of things. This, unfortunately, I think every child I've ever worked with over the years has had poor self-esteem and confidence problems. So when I hear this all the time, it almost makes me laugh because it's so consistent. When we start doing the intervention, Miss Holly, but you don't know, I can't read. They'll tell me I can't read. And I said, you will, but they think they can't. And I always tell parents, this is such a cool thing I have observed over the years. The kids' self-esteem and confidence rises before the skill level does. So after 2 or 3 weeks, honestly, a month with most children, they will walk around or they'll tell their family, I think I can do it now, or something like that. One little guy who was a first grader at a school I worked at, he said to me, Miss Holly, let's see, my mouth finally talked to my brain, and now I can read. So, and then the skills, but the actual skills come a little later. So it takes a while for that. We are literally making new connections in the brain. That does not happen overnight. And anybody who tells you that they can fix your child's dyslexia or learning struggles in the summer is just not telling the truth. Or else it's a very slight problem that has nothing to do with the dyslexia type child. It takes a while to do this. These children don't want to read. Of course they don't. I always tell parents, who amongst us as adults would go do something every single day, 5 days a week, all day, that has to do with something that we know we're terrible at? I mean, wouldn't that just be horrible? But that's what we ask these children to do, not for long. They don't want to go to school. I had a couple of students at one of my schools I worked at years ago, and there was a fourth grade daughter, girl, and her mom told me since kindergarten, she would make herself sick on the way to school in the car, make herself sick so that she would beg her mom to stay home because it turns out she did not want to read. As there's research that says that students as young as first grade know they're behind their peers. Nobody has to tell them. These are smart kids. They're very intuitive kids. They might think they're stupid. Maybe they've been told that in some, maybe not using that word, but maybe they've been kind of given that message by an adult. Or same thing with things, they might think they're lazy or they don't try hard enough. That's because somebody has probably said that. And maybe somebody who means well, honestly. These children tend to have a lot of anxiety, as you can expect. Some of these kids act out in a very negative way. They are it's particularly boys. Research shows that they're the ones that gets into the office. Guess what? They start acting up during reading time so they can get sent to the office. And that's not anything. We don't want that for our students because these are precious, precious children, and we don't want them to turn to that to get attention. We want to help their reading. I've heard of many teachers say they have class clowns, and the clowns happen to be the ones that are below in reading. Interesting. There are other, now this is where the girls get smart, right? They have to go to the bathroom during reading time, and they just time it perfectly so they don't have to read out loud or participate in reading groups or whatever. By the way, for a dyslexic type child to be asked to read out loud is absolute torture. We must not ask our dyslexic type students to read out loud in class. It's humiliating, it's embarrassing, and it's not necessary. Teachers who know better can go and stand beside a child, and instead of asking that child to read out loud, they can read together, which is code for the parent or the teacher reads the passage and the student follows along as the teacher points. That is acceptable. But please, if you have somebody that an adult who is making your child read, of course they need to read out loud, not in front of their peers in a classroom situation. I even spoke to a parent lately who just recently who said her dyslexic son is very embarrassed to read in front of his older sisters because they don't have dyslexia. He does, and so he won't do it. So he and the mom have an agreement. They go in another room, the two of them, and he reads out loud, and that's great. What a great accommodation. So let's talk about how we can help these precious kiddos. There is testing and screening available, and I'm going to talk on another slide more in detail. There is intervention, and this is the key, in my opinion. So it has to be a specific kind of intervention. The kind of intervention that most schools offer, and I'm just using a very, very broad brush here when I say that, is not specific enough to dyslexia to really show improvement. I just screened a kiddo last week, and their school is one of the best schools in this part of the city. And he's been working for 2 years with an interventionist who pulls her from a class during the day, every 5 days a week, and after school 3 days a week. And the test shows the poor girl hasn't made any progress, none. So what a lot of time. And really it's just because some people in education don't know, and I didn't, I will admit, for many, 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 most of my years in education, I did not know about all this stuff until I got myself educated and went to school, got another master's. So it needs to be systematic. There has to be a system in place, explicit, very, very direct, cumulative. It needs to start with a very, very simplest thing. The program I use and I really love the best is called Take Flight. And they start with, this is a P, this is the sound it makes, here's how to write it. And I always tell my kids when they start, this might seem easy peasy. For some, it's not, but it starts easy and then builds on it and gets more difficult. Very, very specific to their issues, addressing those 5 different components of reading. And multisensory is very nice. So the kids can hear it, they do it, they write it, they see it. By the way, we always say if you do homework with a child who has reading struggles, they're going to make mistakes, of course, and that's okay. That's okay. We all do. But the last thing a student sees or reads or writes should be correct. And so if a child is reading along and they read the word can as cat, I would just simply correct them and say cat. I don't say you were wrong or try again or sound that out from the bazillionth time. Just tell them the word cat. Have them repeat it, cat, and then they just move on because they're so used to being corrected and they're so used to this laborious trial and guessing. So for these students, once they get a real screening or testing evaluation, they can, if they go to school, they can get an IEP or a 504. Let me talk about those just briefly. IEPs are individual education plans. 504s are a plan that's based on a more of a medical need, and dyslexia falls under that. So once they have these plans in place, teachers and staff can make accommodations. Very simple things like our dyslexic type kids need time tests are strenuous for them. They usually just get paralyzed and they freeze and they don't do anything. So untimed test, even on standardized testing as they get older, they can, accommodation could be being in a room where it's all quiet. A good accommodation, I think that's really, really good, kind of from the beginning. These kids are so smart, but they can't get their thoughts down on paper. And so testing them orally. I had a dyslexic student who was so self-aware, and I asked her about that, and she, I think, so eloquently explained it to me. She said, when I go to think about what I'm going to write, I think of, and I, in my mind, I've got all these big $10 words, big words, and I know how to say it in a really good way. But then my immediate thought is, but I don't know how to spell any of those big words. So what do? I write the very, very simplest I can. And then my teacher writes, you're writing at a very low level. Well, of course, but if you test it, if the goal of a test is to see what the spelling is or to see how the writing goes, then they're going to get marked down. If the goal of a test is to find out what a child knows, then have them test orally. They will shine. They are so, so smart. Those are some of the accommodations a child can have once they have these plans. Once you have a testing as a homeschool parent or a guardian, you can put some of these accommodations into place in your own homeschooling home. And then there's the use of technology. And I have to admit, I'm not up on all these because I work with mostly young kids, but there's something called speech to text. As an example, I know there's more than that. And for our students who just have such a hard time getting those beautiful thoughts down, they can speak into a computer and the computer writes the words for them. It's not exactly foolproof because I have a student who uses that at his school. He's a sixth grader. He said it often makes mistakes. The computer does. So there you go. It's not perfect. Okay, let's talk about testing. So there's two kinds of testing. There's a formal evaluation, and they will tell you if your child is dyslexic or on that profile. And then there's a screening, and that's the kind I do. And I can't tell a parent if their child is dyslexic, but rather I am going to be able to say if they have tendencies that are consistent with students who are on that dyslexic profile. They have tendencies. So I can't say for sure. It's a shorter test. So what are the advantages of testing? Well, the advantages are that a child will and family will know what's going on. There are many parents who don't want their child tested because they have not wanted their child to have the label. I have been to many, many seminars where they have presented a group of high schoolers who are dyslexic and they talk about their own journeys, very individual. Every single one to the individual says, I was so relieved to find out I was dyslexic, not stupid. Huh. Wow. And so I think that dyslexia does not have the stigma that other um, disabilities have. And I strongly suggest it, but I do know that there are parents who absolutely don't want it. And you know what? It's okay. The parents get to decide. I always tell parents, my job is to give you all the information I can. You, the parent, you get to make the decision. So other things, we call them this weird word, comorbidity, things that happen alongside dyslexia. One is dysgraphia. It's pretty common with dyslexics that I see this. I found this really cool article, which I'm sorry I didn't get on your handout, so I'm going to leave it up if you want to write it down. but it's about cursive, why cursive is important. So I know not everybody who helps with dyslexic kids believes in cursive. I've heard somebody say it's a cognitive overload for our dyslexic students, but the research says it's not. And this is an awesome article about why that is. So I'll give you the short version. If a child has to write a letter, then pick up their pencil and spend some cognitive time and effort figuring out where the next letter starts, and then pick up their pencil and figure out where this one starts and where this one starts, that's cognitive overload. However, with cursive, a child can put their pencil down one time, not pick it up till the end of the word. That frees their mind to think about spelling and about meaning of what they're writing. So there is a lot of research out there. Cursive and the second graders that I work with Take Flight, they learn cursive, and oh my gosh, they think they're hot stuff because they get to learn cursive before their peers. This is an example of dysgraphia. So dysgraphia is more than spelling. It's really a way see how these letters are formed, like this M is formed not the right way, but this M is formed the right way. This S falls below what we call the baseline. So sometimes periods are missing, punctuation, sometimes capitals are missing. There's going to be a lot of spelling, of course. My favorite book is about a boy and a dog, I think. Sometime he get lost. So dysgraphia is really about how the letters are formed and how they sit. And you can see it's super inconsistent with the way they sit. That's dysgraphia. Is that something that we can help with? Oh, absolutely. Practice, and let the child do cursive. Dyscalculia is a math disability. It's it's a different thing than dyslexia, but many of our dyslexic students have a problem memorizing their math facts, particularly multiplication tables are really hard for our dyslexic kids. I asked a speaker once about this, and she said it's because memorizing math facts involves so much language, and that's where our students struggle. And so it's not impossible, but they struggle much more than other kids. And then ADHD. So they're mutually exclusive. So just because your child is ADHD doesn't mean they're dyslexic. Just because your child is dyslexic or on that profile, they don't automatically have ADHD. But having said that, about a third of dyslexics do have ADHD. So it can happen either one without the other, but there's a 30% overlap there of dyslexics. Okay, so I'm going to stop for just a second. I'm going to unshare only because I want to take a break, and then we'll finish the hopeful part. We will finish, so let me stop sharing for a minute. And I want to just take some questions or comments, discussion with what we've gone over thus far.
Perfect. Thank you, Holly. Yeah, we've had some comments. Here, let's see. About a homeschooling family. Oh, let's see. So someone related earlier to when you were talking about some of the challenges that may not necessarily be dyslexia, but really impact reading levels. Stacy said that last year her fourth grader had completely regressed, and his standardized test scores got worse with the end of the year testing with his teacher last year. So exactly what you were mentioning, that some teachers know these things inside and out and some don't, and
Right.
how challenging that can be. So I love that Parents Challenge helps parents advocate for their kiddos when they're noticing these things.
Can I just throw something in there too?
Yeah.
It's not the teacher's fault, because listen, our universities are not doing a good job in teaching our newbie teachers how to teach structured reading. I will tell you, I taught for 20 plus years and didn't know this stuff. And I remember just slamming my fist on the desk as I was learning this stuff, thinking, why in the world didn't I get taught this? I mean, I should have been taught this years ago. So I don't blame the teachers. They're doing the best they can, but it's a fact that so many are just, they don't have the opportunity to be taught well in terms of how to teach reading. And who does that really hurt? It hurts our children, right? So,
Yeah, perfect, which is, yeah, again, such a great reason to advocate for our kiddos if we suspect something is off. So perfect.
yes.
And then you mentioned testing, that you can help evaluate kiddos. I don't know if I heard exactly what you said about how do homeschool families get their kiddos evaluated?
Oh, so it's really the same way that anybody in a school does. There are, trying to think if there are any schools, and I don't know of any schools who will do a dyslexia evaluation. They have to be careful because there's liability issues in schools. So I'll at the end, well, I think I actually put it on your handout. Um, there's many places. The two that I always suggest, because I'm most familiar with them only, is the CLLC, the Colorado Learning and Literacy and Learning Center. Dr. Lynn Fitzhugh, she trained me, and she does testing. It's at the south end of town. And let's see, and Children's Hospital here. Now that we have a Children's Hospital, they do screening. I've heard from parents that it can vary in cost, but it's usually in the low thousands, usually. Now, sometimes people get deals. I've also had parents tell me, oh, I found this neuropsych who will do a dyslexia evaluation for $200 or whatever. I don't know of everybody, but homeschool parents have the same it, the same right, the same channel to find somebody to test their kids.
And
That
do you
makes
know
sense.
if insurance normally steps in with that or
So
not?
I have heard, usually not, but I have had parents whose insurance, I can't tell you which, have covered it. So it's worth a question for sure.
And this is definitely something you can post to your parent coordinator with Parents Challenge. If it feels like you really want an evaluation and you can't afford the costs, we can enter into a discussion about that.
Right.
Also, so,
And I will say too, Jessica, that a screening for homeschool parents, a screening is probably enough. And my screening is $300. And that's there are many of us that screen, and it's, I think it's 3 to 6 or 700 ish, and so that's a lot less expensive. And I did that very 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 purposefully so that parents could take advantage without having to go through. And again, I wouldn't be able to tell you if your child is dyslexic, only if they have dyslexic tendencies. But I would think I've done it with a lot of homeschool parents, and it seems to be enough for them because they don't need to have it to bring to their school to get an IEP or a 504 plan.
perfect. I think that answers all the questions I see on here right now. Does anyone else have something that they would like to ask or throw out there? You can just unmute yourself.
Hi. Hi, I have a question. Hi, my daughter does have dyslexic tendencies. She went through Allies and D49.
Okay.
Now, here's my question. She's in IEP, but she is now a 7th grader, and she has a resource teacher and a para that works with her. Now, I have heard the para said that they're working towards having her removed from an IEP. Is that something that you recommend? No, okay.
Okay, now don't tell your school, your daughter's school I said this, okay?
I won't.
I think you have to be very, very careful not to remove a child from an IEP too quickly. Very careful. Because here's what's going on. Your child is doing better because she's getting support. So the school's thought is, oh, well, she doesn't need the support. But she's only doing better because she's alongside of the support. I have seen Maria, so many times children getting taken off of IEPs and they plummet and they end up having to go on because they need the support. There is nothing wrong with a child needing support. Now, from a school's perspective, I believe that every school's goal is to have as few children on IEPs as possible. It makes them look better. It shows that they're doing a good job. So I understand that. But boy, guard that for your own daughter. Guard that because I have seen over and over again kids being taken off with the assumption, oh, look how great she's doing, but she's got all this support. But look how great she's doing. They take them off and they can't do it without the support. So I'm not
Go
going to
ahead.
tell you.
Okay. Yes. So what is the difference between 504 and IEP? Like, would she go from IEP to 504 and is that the same? Or it's not comparison?
Right. So 504s really are supposed to be medically based. But dyslexia is tricky because it falls under the medical because it's a brain thing, right? So if a child was hard of hearing or they needed some special thing visually, that would fall under a 504 because it's medical. IEP is more of an academic achievement kind of a thing.
Okay.
And it gets a little blurry with dyslexia because for a long time, schools would not allow dyslexias to fall under an IEP, but then it's not that they got around it. They finally figured out it was a medical thing, and so they could put it under the 504. The important thing is the accommodations. 504s don't have minutes of intervention attached to them. So your daughter's IEP, you said she has people working with her, right?
Yes.
With a 504, she probably wouldn't, but she would have some accommodations like more time on tests or on time or oral examination instead of written, those kinds of things. Does that
Okay.
make sense?
Yes. Thank you.
You're
Thank you.
welcome.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
best of luck. Best of luck.
Thank you.
Can I also chime in? My daughter does have dyslexia and it's diagnosed and she is on a 504. She's in 4th grade. I would also just caution, well, I would encourage you though too, because my daughter doesn't need an IEP, but she does have dyslexia. She's very impacted. She is behind in reading. I chose not to go the IEP route.
Okay.
But with the 504, she does have a lot of support through like a counselor for her anxiety, lots of accommodations. So also just asking your school like what they include on their 504 could be helpful too. Because if your daughter is in a place where maybe she academically is performing, and that is something you guys want to explore, just asking more questions about the 504, because that's what we did. So a 504 is an option too for dyslexia.
Yeah. And did you help write that 504, Jordan?
Well, I am a teacher and I work at the
Okay.
school that she goes to. So
Okay.
yes,
How convenient.
I had a lot of say in it.
Good.
But our biggest struggle with my daughter is just she is a hard worker, so kind of everything you talked about, but her anxiety was really getting in the way. And so it wasn't that she's not growing, because like with an IEP, it gets hard because you can't always qualify for an IEP, even if you're behind, if you're growing. And so like that's where we got tripped up with not getting an IEP, but I did help really write like what does she need, and so the accommodations were really specific to like what she needed.
In my understanding, I used to write IEPs and one of this help write IEPs, or sorry, 504s, I mean.
Yeah.
And my understanding is that parents are supposed to be a real part of that. Like they're supposed to be there
You get
helping to determine what those accommodations are going to be. So
Yeah,
thank you, Jordan.
like
That's really helpful.
just ask lots of questions. You're her biggest advocate.
Holly, there's another question about, are you able to kind of root out reading challenges versus when there's anxiety causing reading concerns? We've got a parent who would like to know about screening, if you can kind of sort that out. And Angela, you had more insight in there if you want to clarify further.
I really cannot, because I'm not a psychologist, I really can't test or screen for anxiety. I can only tell you how your child is performing in different areas. And yes, including like spelling or, I mean, there's a part of what I do that is the kids have to write sentences, and I always make note of affect. What's the affect? Some kids writing sentences is like they just fall apart, right? That's so, they get really, really anxious. Sometimes spelling does that to them. It's so frustrating. So no, not formally, not formally. And I would not be surprised if they're pretty intertwined with one another if a child tends to be anxious.
Yeah, that was my question. We have a referral to neuropsych coming up. And but then I'm also homeschooling him because I pulled him last year because school was just so anxiety forming for him that he was working really hard to be good in school, but also not progressing academically whatsoever. And I've had reading tutors come in and help, and they always say, well, there's something going on, but we don't know. And so I know I need to go the formal route. But it's so hard for me to tell what's causing what. Like, is the anxiety coming first, or is the reading issue coming first? So I think I'm probably going to go both routes and screen with reading and do the neuropsych and just cover all our bases.
Yeah, I think a neuropsych would be super valuable in that case. Really, Angela. I think that person should be able to give you some idea about the anxiety part. Mhm.
Okay, I think that's everything for now, if you want to keep cruising.
Ready to move on? See if I can find it again. Here we go. Okay. Okay, we talked about spelling. Let me just get my slideshow going. Sorry. Oh, computers. Okay. All right, let's get back here. Okay, so we talked about the comorbidities. Okay, so success stories. I feel like sometimes it's easy for me to dwell on all these things I know about all the problems with dyslexic students. So I want to talk a little bit, no, I want to talk a lot more positive. So these are sometimes kids find comfort in knowing that these famous people have been, some of them are not alive anymore, but are dyslexic. And so amongst them, you have entrepreneurs and directors, actors, scientists, artists, all kinds of things, singers. So I think it's really, really important for our dyslexic students to understand they are not alone. That's the biggest thing. The one thing, parent that mentioned, I think it was maybe Angela that mentioned your daughter went to Allies. The nice thing about being with other dyslexic students is they don't stand out as different or weird. They don't stand out. They're all unique, but they don't stand out as being behind. They really are not alone. And I'm a director of a program called Lit First, and we do small groups. And yes, it's not as nice in many ways as working one-on-one. I always think that's the best. However, this is kind of an unexpected blessing for me. These kids love it because they're with other students who struggle like they do, and so they don't feel like they're alone. And so there's a lot of famous people. I am always surprised to learn how many dyslexic kids grow up to be writers. Can you imagine? I mean, that just blows my mind because they're so smart. They struggle with language, they struggle with writing, spelling, whatever. They grow up to be writers. That's incredible to me. So I just think that is a huge open door and a hope story for our students and parents. I really, really believe in being open and honest with these kids. Most of them are so intuitive. They know what's going on. I mean, they know they're behind, they know when they improve, they know they might be different, but they also know when they start getting it, they know. And so talking openly, you have dyslexia and your dad had dyslexia, or my grandfather had dyslexia, whatever. And talking about a bright future for them because it is so full of hope. And so I have stories from the not so famous. So I'm a private therapist, and sometimes my kids, without me prodding, will just send me these notes, and these are my why, why I do this. So I'm going to read just a few, if you don't mind, because I think they're so touching and they're so meaningful in terms of all this. So this is from a parent. My husband and I can't thank you enough for the time and love you poured into our daughter. While she was with you, she, I have to read the handwriting here, she truly transformed into a confident reader and a much more successful learner. Thank you so much for your contribution to her journey. Without you, we would all be in a very different place. I thought, well, that's really interesting. The parents would be in a different place too. This is from their daughter. Miss Holly, you have done so many things for me and all the other kids you have helped. I am forever grateful for what you have done for me. I will miss you. She graduated. This one is from a third grader I'm working with currently. Dear Miss Holly, you have a big chunk of my heart. Oh, come on. And my life. I thank God for bringing you into my life. Thank you for tutoring me. It is paying off. What you do is amazing. Okay, that's a third grader who understands the value here. To me, I mean, we are changing lives helping these children, whether you do it as a parent or, get a therapist to help you. We are changing lives. What better, I mean, of course I'm prejudiced. What better thing could we do, right? Um, let me go back to, let's see, just one second. Oh, yeah. So these are some resources. This is what I gave you. Okay. I just want to add in a note of caution. There are people who offer screenings who will talk to your child and determine from that they are probably dyslexic. That's fine. It's free. And I say go for it. The problem that I see with this is that they don't provide any written report of the tests because they don't give tests. It's just, their expert opinion, and they are experts. I'm not saying that, that they're not, but please be careful if you need something written that you go to somebody for a screening who will do a report. When I give a screening, I give, oh gosh, 15 different subtests, I think, because there's no one test for dyslexia, right? So about 16 different subtests. Then which takes 2 hours for the child. It's grueling for them. But then I write up a report, and the parents and I sit for an hour and we go over that. That report, even though it's only a screening, is enough to take to a school for any plan, or it's enough for homeschool moms and dads to go to any entity like an enrichment program. I was working with this one child that I just read one of the ones I read the letter. She was in a program, and it was a program that had nothing to do with reading or writing. However, the teacher determined that they were going to make an assignment. They had to do research and write a report about airplanes or something like that. And this girl I was working with, I think she was 5th grade at the time, she could not read this big book and make a report. No way. And so I said, tell them that she's dyslexic. And the teacher said, I want something in writing. So she brought her screening, and they said, okay, good enough. We won't make her do this. It was a lot to ask of. It was a lot to ask of any student, in my opinion, to read a big book about flight and have them do a report and present it. But she didn't have to do any of that because she had something written. So just be careful when you get a screening. If you choose that direction, make sure it's something that there's a written report that somebody who screens can give you, and most do. But just be careful if you don't need that written report, and it is free. Go for it. That's your decision. I just wanted to put that out there so that nobody gets stuck. I had a parent tell me, well, trying to get into this lit first, and she said, we require that our students be on the dyslexic profile or have had evaluation. So basically a screening or an evaluation from anybody. And if they don't, I can give it to them, but I'll accept anybody's. But they had a screening it was a phone call with their child, interview, I guess you'd say. no report. Well, I said, I can't accept that because I have no idea. And I contacted the folks that did that interview and they were not willing to share, but I think it's because they didn't have anything written. So if you need something written, if you think you may want for any reason, just be aware of that as you do. I'm certainly not telling you not to do it if that's what you want to do. These are some good resources. This last one is so cute. It's written from the perspective of a dyslexic girl whose dad is dyslexic. And the title, If You're So Smart, How Come You Can't Spell Mississippi? I love it. So she talks about her own journey and her dad's. This is another one I highly recommend. It's a little book, it's an easy read, The Adult Side of Dyslexia. Oh my gosh, it's basically testimonies of adult dyslexics uh, telling their story of their journey when they were children, and it will break your heart. I reread it every once in a while just to so I can get a good cry. No, just so I really can appreciate how difficult a journey it is for these children. We cannot take it lightly. This one, Overcoming Dyslexia, is a big, thick book, but I would say it's kind of like the Bible of the dyslexia world. Everything in it. Sally Shaywitz is the phenomenal person as far as the one I was speaking of earlier from Yale, and she's just amazing. She does current research and she's put out movies about dyslexia. And if you want to know anything, if you're just beginning this journey, I would suggest this one. Yes, but that's not exhaustive. There are many, many more books, more written all the time about dyslexia. And then there are a couple of websites, but I like this one the best, and it's just the International Dyslexia Association, IDA. It's very thorough, and what I really love about that is they have what are called fact sheets, fact. And so they've got fact sheets about every imaginable thing that you could possibly think of to ask. And I was on it today as I was finishing my PowerPoint here, just looking at different stuff. And I kind of had to get myself out of it because it was so interesting, pull myself away. There are other websites that are very good. This is a podcast I was required to read to get every year. I have to take so many hours to get my certification as a therapist. I love this one though. This is a lady named Emily Hanford called Sold a Story, How Teaching Kids to Read Went So Wrong. It also made me cry and also slam my fist in anger at the stuff going on. Really interesting though. If you are so inclined and you like to watch a interesting YouTube, I think that's a really good informative one as well. And then finally, so we'll take some more questions, and I always do this when I talk to parents, and I never get through it without shedding a tear. So why do I do what I do? It's called the Starfish Story, and I think some of you may have heard this, but I'm going to read it. An old man was walking on the beach one morning after a storm. In the distance, he could see someone moving like a dancer. As he came closer, he saw that it was a young woman picking up starfish and gently throwing them into the ocean. Young lady, why are you throwing starfish into the ocean? The sun is up and the tide is going out, and if I do not throw them back, they will die, she said. But young lady, do you not realize that there are miles, many miles of beach and thousands of starfish? You cannot possibly make a difference. The young woman listened politely, then bent down, picked up another starfish, and threw it into the sea. Well, it made a difference for that one, didn't it? I just love that story. And every time I get, tired or busy or whatever, I always think another starfish. This is worth doing. These are beautiful children. I just absolutely love their personalities. They're all unique. And what a joy and honor it is for me to be able to work with them. So what other comments or questions might you have at this point?
We've seen a little discussion in the chat with wait
Okay.
list to see, or to how long the wait is to see neurological doctor. Thank
So
you,
for
ladies,
testing, you mean?
for helping. Yeah, are you guys thinking testing specifically? If you can kind of chime in right now, that would be great.
I don't know, what she was needing, what Stacy was needing. I was just answering her with neuropsych, how long it's taken us, but we were prior seen, so it's a little quicker to get in. I know when you're a new patient with any kind of screening, it can take months to get in, so.
Angela, what is your wait time?
For me, it's just 2 to 3 months, from this referral because he was seen in 2021 for, some other neurological things, so we're
Okay.
a prior patient. But if we went through Children's Hospital, we were looking at 6 months plus. And then they also do you have to wait 2 months to call until their schedule opens up, and it's a whole
Oh,
other
wow,
process.
okay. I have heard that sometimes with some places, there is quite a wait. I just screened a little girl last week, and her mom called and said, so we're on a list and for February. Can you do it any sooner? And I said, yeah, how about next week? So it just depends. It just depends. But yeah, there can be a wait, and that's I just don't like the idea of these kids having to wait till they get help and we get information about them. So thank you.
I do have a question. So do you do like outside of school tutoring? For
What
like
I
kids
do,
with dyslexia? Yeah.
uh-huh. I do, yes, I have a couple of homeschoolers and 3 kids that come after they put in a full day of school, which is they're exhausted when they get to me, but yeah.
No, for sure. That's just what I was looking for my daughter. We did that a
Oh,
little bit a couple of years back, but she was exhausted all the time. But
okay.
I was just curious.
So, Jordan, there is a website, which I didn't put down on there. It's called altaread.org, ALTAREAD.org. And you can look for a therapist by area, by state and by area. I
Okay.
think zip code maybe, and see
Okay.
who is currently taking students and yeah, contact them that way. Put that on there.
Okay. Can you spell it one more time?
ALTAREAD
Uh-huh.
all
Okay.
together, and then .org.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you.
Mhm. And that means that all these people have gone through a certification process. They're either a practitioner or a therapist, so they've gone through the training for
Perfect.
years. Yes.
Okay.
Holly, I know you had suggested the Take Flight curriculum for any of the rest of us homeschool parents or just parents who want to help support our kids after school. Do you have any other curriculums that you highly suggest or highly do not suggest with your expertise?
I there are a few that homeschool parents can utilize, but I haven't heard good things, so I'm not going to mention those. Boy. Yeah, well, that's a really good question. I don't have a whole bunch of them that I recommend. I've been trained in about 5 of them, but they all need training. I mean, I had to put in 700 plus hours to be able to use Take Flight with students. So that is kind of hard. I mean, there's Lindamood Bell, but I think that's mostly for teachers. There's Wilson, which is more popular on the east side of the United States. I think parents can use that maybe. Barbara Wilson created it. There's one called Slingerland, and that's a West Coast thing, but I think that homeschool parents might be able to use that. It's a lady's name, SLINGER, Slinger, and then LAND. But you might have to just Google something. It's hard because the more this gets to be okay to have your child labeled, if you will, tested for dyslexia, the more people that are putting out programs. And so then it gets confusing. There's a program that I've heard, I haven't used it. It's called UFly, and it's the initials or the letters UFLI, and I think it's at a University of Florida. I think maybe homeschool. Yeah, but I am sorry, I'm sure there's more. I just don't know of them. One that is very popular with homeschool, a language arts program, is all about reading, and I love all about reading. It's not robust enough for our kids that have dyslexia. I just love it, but I can't use it with my kids because the dyslexic type is just not, it's not rich enough for them, what they need. So, but as a homeschool, just regular program, I think it's phenomenal. Yeah, thanks. Good questions.
Holly, we have someone asking whether you have openings then or not to see
Um,
students.
Well, I don't have any after school openings. I'm completely filled. So are you asking as a homeschool parent?
Yeah, we actually do homeschool, so I was asking as a homeschool parent.
Oh, is it Kelly? Is that who
Yeah,
is
yes.
talking? Okay.
Mhm.
I have my information at the end of this, and why don't you go ahead and contact me and we'll see. Otherwise, that altaread.org is a good place to find somebody. I know even as we speak right now, there are students going through the program to be a therapist at Colorado College. They are always looking for students to work with because you have to work 1,000 hours. You have to work a lot of hours. So they're always looking for what about Kelly, if you just email me after we're done or whatever with your name, and then I can connect you with Dr. Fitzhugh, who taught me. She's also, in charge of this program at CC, and then maybe she has some students who are looking for somebody to work with.
Okay, yeah,
Tammy,
that,
do you mind saying?
I live in like kind of north, but I'm happy to, travel a little ways. So
Okay,
I don't know. One of them is in second grade, and she's the one that I'm a little more concerned about. Um, and I actually did teach for a while, but I just still feel like I could maybe use a little extra support.
Sure.
And then the other one is in fourth grade, and I'm not as concerned about her, but I still feel like maybe just since we're seeing it in the younger one, just to make sure I haven't missed something in the older one.
Yeah. Good mom. Good mom. Why don't you contact me when we're done or in the next few days, whenever, and
Okay.
let's continue chatting. I'd be happy to chat with you about it.
Thank you, Holly.
Sure, you're welcome.
My wife also does take flight.
Oh,
So if you want to try to check with her if she has the option available things.
awesome. What's her first name?
Her name is Sarah Porter,
Oh,
and her website is goodnewsreading.com.
and do you have a daughter, Hannah?
Yep.
No. Yes.
Kaylee.
Okay.
Awesome.
Okay.
Any other
Good students.
questions or comments, folks? It looks like there was a little discussion about whether Medicaid covers evals, and someone said no, not in their experience. I don't know if anyone else has anything to chime in with that.
And I don't know.
Yeah. Anything else? Holly, this has been so much fantastic information. We thank you so much for taking the evening to help walk us through just, these complicated, heart-rending issues too.
Yeah. You're very welcome. It's really my pleasure, honestly. If we can get more people informed, we can help more students, and that's my goal. So really my
Yes, and
pleasure.
I love that so much, especially when you were talking about not even the teachers who are educated to teach our kiddos know the depths of these challenges. So if we parents can be more informed, we can really advocate better. So
Right.
thank you so much.
Okay. All right. Good night, everybody.